Next, we have our first award presentation, the 3PL Excellence Award, recognizing organizations and individuals that provide exceptional value as a third-party logistics provider through customer service, reliability, and industry expertise. But before we do that, I'm going to introduce the most oft-quoted man in the world. And as Aaron pointed out, the best presenter, public speaker you'll ever see. He is Eugene Seroka, Executive Director for the Port of Los Angeles and Chief Logistics Officer for the City of Los Angeles, who will talk to us today about supply chain outlook, priorities for building market share. Eugene Seroka.
Thanks, Wink, and good morning again. In television, we have this theme that overexposure may slow down ratings, but nonetheless, I'd like to talk to you at Nick's request just a little bit about what we see in the marketplace, supply chain, all the factors that influence it, and more importantly, here at home, what we can do to drive business through our Southern California gateways. Because sum and substance, for every 4 containers we move at the Port of Los Angeles, it creates 1 job. Very powerful. So we'll start with a little bit of the macro overview. A lot of things influence the supply chain. As you've learned in class, as you understand in business every day, right here in Los Angeles and at far-reaching locations from where you're visiting right now. Everyone loves to talk about the economy. Yet, for folks like Carl and me who've been around a little while, this economic equation looks very different than those in the past. Today, we have the lowest unemployment in our nation's history since 1969. There are about 10 million jobs open across the country in various industrial verticals. We've had rising interest rates in an effort to combat inflation, and that inflation has now come down for 12 consecutive months. We're looking eagerly towards tomorrow and the latest CPI numbers coming off the 3% announcement for the month of June. Yet families are still grappling with high prices at the grocery store, cost at the pump, and other ways that we're just trying to stretch the family budget as best we can. In our industry, higher interest rates mean higher inventory carrying costs, so complications across the economy that haven't necessarily been in combination before when we evaluate the supply chain. Equity markets are on a tear, but yesterday, Moody's downgraded a number of banks, and that's coming off of last week's statement to downgrade the U.S. credit rating. So a lot of interesting combinations in this economic equation that take a long time to unravel and make sense of as we look to our businesses in next quarter, the following year, short, intermediate, and long-term progress. At the Port of Los Angeles, the decisions we make are 20, 25, and 30 years at a time from an infrastructure standpoint. Interest rates play a big deal in that as well. Other trends include what we're looking at from a digitalization standpoint. Please raise your hand if you're in the IT sector. Well, there's more of you than just one. Raise your hands high if you're in the IT sector. From looking at the roster of attendees at the 11th Annual Summit, more and more technology companies continue to join this venue each August. And that shows the brain power, the strength that we have in technology and what it could mean for tomorrow. The university is even offering now degrees and career opportunities across technology, including AI. This industry will never move slower than it is today. It will continue to fuel what we do in thinking faster than the human mind, creating prescriptive and predictive analytics so we can see supply chains evolve even faster than they are. But with that comes an unbelievable responsibility to protect that data. And while cybersecurity continues to be discussed at all 4 corners, What we're now seeing is a shift in understanding exactly where those vulnerabilities are. They may not just be with phishing emails and texts that we receive on a daily basis or other untowardly activities from the bad guys. It's safe to say those bad guys are watching us right now. And we're going to have to protect the vulnerabilities that we have within our organizations and public institutions. Machinery that's made overseas, intelligent machinery that is capturing data, sights and sounds of activities across the supply chain. It's nothing to get crazy about at this moment, but it is one thing that's going to take the next step in evolution when it comes to protecting our interests. At the Port of Los Angeles, for example, just in the month of June, our Cybersecurity Operations Center stopped 64 million cyber intrusion attempts. And for the first half of the year, we're averaging more than 50 intrusion attempts, all of which that we've stopped. But trying to see around corners and over hills becomes even more complicated. And that's why the Port of LA, along with the city, established one of the world's first cyber resilience centers. Picking up on that necessary work of our CSOC, the idea was to bring the private sector together with organized labor and those public institutions like the City and Port of Los Angeles. To date, through that partnership, which now amounts to more than 24 organizations, co-created with IBM, we've stopped 12 new cyber intrusion attempts that were aimed at our private sector partners without them even knowing about it. So there'll be much more work in this area, and our diligence, our thought leadership here in this venue will continue to share new and better ideas to protect that supply chain. This truly has, by some observers, been called the summer of discontent. So much work around the combination of labor relations between employers and the folks that are out there moving cargo, doing our work. Take you back just a little while. You may remember the railroads and their employees' union trying to get together after 2.5 years of on and off again negotiations. And then it was the work here at the Los Angeles Unified School District with folks that take care of those properties across the more than 650,000 students that attend class every day. Hotel workers are still without a noticeable agreement and continue to struggle to find good middle-class jobs in that sector. Then we had the protracted longshore negotiations with our dock workers across the West Coast, 29 ports represented, and a 13-month negotiation. Collective bargaining is hard, but it is a necessary process built on the cornerstone of law in this country to get both companies and employees to the right place. Fortunately enough for all of us, back on June 14th, a tentative labor agreement was reached with those dock workers and their employers, and they're going through the necessary democratic process to get that offer ratified by the end of this summer. And just this week, Deputy Mayor Bramajan and I went through yet another labor discussion with the service union here in the city of Los Angeles. More than 11,000 representative employees looking to bargain fairly with the city of Los Angeles and get a contract, voted up a 24-hour strike yesterday. And while there were pain points felt throughout the city, whether it was trash collection, work at LAX, at the Port of Los Angeles, vessels did not move in and out yesterday with our port pilots in solidarity with the Service Employees International Union. So these complications of what we went through during COVID, where a number of folks in our industry became known to the world because of the media coverage, and looking at what now is termed as essential workforce, all seem to converge at the same time with their agreements and their need to make sure that they kept up with inflation, that they could put food on the table and their children through school. I think we're on the other side of a lot of this struggle that we've seen in our industry, but it is a key reminder that good middle-class jobs make up the backbone of this supply chain, and all of us around that can continue to build. As we look next, the opportunities around exports are right in our line of sight. Challenges for so long, whether it was trade policy, tariffs, retaliatory tariffs, American manufacturers and agricultural farmers, growers, producers have all been impacted. Looking for new markets outside of traditional ones has become commonplace, but the strength of the US dollar is limiting in some cases as well. Yet, folks who have jobs in the export sector, on average, according to the US Department of Labor, earn 17% more than equivalent jobs in other sectors. And in fact, if we want to bolster GDP, the growth of exports and the combination of that and the balance of trade will help continue to propel this economy. Again, announced for the second quarter, U.S. GDP rose by 2.4%, more than many experts on Wall Street and other areas had predicted. A resilient economy in the face of rising interest rates and uncertain inflationary times have seen the American consumer continue to propel the United States' resiliency. And as we look forward in that economy, the core concepts of strong jobs creation, 13.1 million jobs created over the last 2 years here in the United States, with a renewed focus on exports and the balance of trade, can help see us through. And while many experts continue to call for recession, please remember, we saw that in a textbook fashion last year. Quarters 1 and 2 showed GDP decline 2 consecutive quarters. That, in an academic setting and by economists, is the true definition of a recession. So whether it be soft landing, shallow, all the other things that you hear on cable news, we look pretty good. And I think we'll have the ability to avoid the calamity that some so-called experts had called for and continue to propel even in uncertain times. And the last big piece that we evaluate and we're looking at on a consistent basis is infrastructure. The administration in Washington, governor's office in California, and our mayor's administration here in Los Angeles have all gotten behind this concept of bringing world-class infrastructure back into the public discourse. Airports, roads, bridges, and seaports. My job when I go back to Washington and up to Sacramento is to make sure that elected officials and policymakers never forget what we looked like with 109 ships at anchor off this Southern California coast, where we were trying to squeeze 10 lanes of freeway traffic into 5, setting records every single week, but still with more cargo behind that. So my job is Director of Amnesia Prevention. The concept is to make sure that these policymakers remember what got us here, put us in the national conscience, and why the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was passed on a bipartisan basis. The Inflation Reduction Act to help us get to that zero emissions environment that the deputy mayor just spoke of. And a California Governor Gavin Newsom's budget that prioritized ports and supply chain. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, State of California Transportation Secretary Tokes Omashawkin came down to present the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles with records amount of grant money, nearly $800 million between the two ports and our surrounding communities to help build that infrastructure, to speed the process of infrastructure development so we could attack the next unknown in the supply chain, whatever that may be. And in total, Governor Newsom offered up in his budget, again, during troubling times, $1.5 billion in infrastructure for the state's 11 municipal ports. Never before have we seen the state of California back up these ports like we're seeing today. And now it's a call on the federal government to do that. So far, halfway through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, what we have seen is about 15% of all appropriations go to West Coast ports. Now, those same West Coast ports account for about 40% of all the containerized cargo that moves into the country. We've got to make sure that we're getting commensurate share with the amount of traffic that we move. It's not about fairness. We have to earn it. We have to be better applicants in these processes for discretionary spending. We must move to the front of the class with those applications to be ultra competitive. And remember, please, that this cargo that moves through the Port of Los Angeles reaches each and every one of our nation's 435 congressional districts. It truly is a conversation of national significance. So with all that said, and all the complications we see in our line of sight, there are three areas that we have to get after very quickly. Everything is more expensive in California. We know that, from real estate to gasoline prices, electricity, and utilities. But the secret sauce here, even with those fixed costs of how expensive it is in real estate, workforce, and utilities, the more cargo we move, the lower the unit cost becomes. If we can continue to push cargo through this gateway, that level of competitiveness when it comes to cost is better than anyone else in the country. But it's got to start with driving that cargo volume and density to build scale. And with these different bumps that we've seen impacting our supply chain, whether it's labor negotiations, regulation, other areas, we've got to keep our eye singularly focused. If we have a strong port, and it is strong financially, the supply chain strength will be evident, and those outsized responsibilities of work in our labor force and environment can become self-evident. And that's the second piece. Well, we talk about a very complex labor landscape. 1 in 9 jobs in Southern California is tied to this port complex. That's about 1 million paychecks every week that families depend on. In the city of Los Angeles, it's 1 in 15 jobs. Extremely important. So to try to do our part, we're building, along with our neighbors at the Port of Long Beach, the nation's first goods movement training campus. It is meant to help upskill and reskill our workforce, no matter what walk of life you come from or what occupation you're interested in. If you're of my vintage, you may need to learn to work more with a computer than you do with a wrench. But all in all, having this campus, 20 acres of property donated by the Port and City of Los Angeles, $40 million in cash to invest, and $110 million of investment from Governor Newsom and the state, the ability to recruit, attract, and retain talent will be key for our industry. We're no different than anyone else across the nation, and that's why I speak to you students today. Make this your industry of choice. There's a wide variety of opportunities, but right here at home in Los Angeles, we are going to have a showcase as to what those opportunities can mean across an entire variety of occupations dealing with the supply chain. And finally, to be competitive and bring that marketplace back to us, we've been losing market share at the ports of LA and Long Beach for over 20 years. There was a time in 2002 when 50% of America's imports came through the Port of LA. Today, that number has dwindled to 33% of that market. For every 4 containers we move at the Port of LA, we create 1 job. 1 job creates prosperity for families. It creates tax dollars for cities, counties, and the state to improve. Possessory use taxes on land for our utilities to provide better water and electricity. And now the investment on infrastructure for battery storage and distribution, hydrogen creation, transmission, and offtake. That's what it all amounts to. And that last piece is going to be around regulation. As the deputy mayor said, in our DNA, straightforward, is we want to be the greenest and cleanest but most competitive supply chain possible. You can't do that if you're staring in the face of regulation where technology is still at nascent stages. Battery electric trucks, while in pre-production, still have a difficulty with payload. A battery weighs about 16,000 pounds. That's about 16,000 pounds less cargo you can put into that container. That prototype truck still has difficulty going over the Vincent Thomas Bridge with payload twice in 1 day, getting over the Cajon Pass just once. The technology will improve, batteries will get smaller, storage capabilities will grow. But this must be done in a voluntary collaborative basis because the price tag is more than you and I could ever imagine. And if it's law, you've got to comply. The easy way around this is just to put a cap on emissions at the port. Cargo goes elsewhere. But that doesn't do us any good either, because the longer cargo travels to ports and complexes with less and fewer requirements around emissions means that we're not doing the world what we should be doing. So let's continue to band together, work collaboratively, push the envelope, do everything we can to be a leader. But keep in mind that it's going to take partnerships at the federal, state, and local level, along with the all-important private and academic sectors to make this dream a reality. So these are the three pieces we've identified that we must get after every day, and I will conclude with this. I don't know what I don't know, and that's why I need big thinkers around me. I need folks that look with a different lens than I do to keep pushing forward and keep creating opportunities. New opportunities will mean new ways of doing business, but making sure that institutional knowledge that resides here in Southern California and at this great university is used to its maximum. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for the opportunity once again to have the privilege of speaking with you, and can't wait for the rest of the conference to begin. Thank you.